Okay, so let's have a look at conditionals in JavaScript. And conditionals is just a fancy way of saying making decisions. So we can kind of say, if something is true, do something, but if something is not true, do something else. So carrying on from our intro to JS lesson, we've got obviously our index.html here that we were working with and our app.js here. What I'm going to do, if you've not got these open, of course, open terminal or git bash, navigate to your classwork folder, and then open up the intro to JS folder in front of you in VS Code using code space dot. Now, I've got this running here, and I also have live server running so that I can see the console output. Just in order to keep this nice and organized, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come into my app.js. I'm going to do Command and A to select everything. And then we'll use Command and / or Control and A to select everything on Windows and Control / to comment out everything here. And I'm just going to save that, make sure that nothing is running in our console. Excellent. Now I'm going to come over here to the File Explorer and just make a new file called conditionals.js. Great. And then what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to go into my index.html, and then right below this script tag here, I'm going to add another script tag. Now feel free to copy and paste that. I'm going to use a little shortcut here, which on Mac is just Option Shift and down, and that will copy it will copy the line you're currently on underneath. And then, so I'm going to make this new script line here, and I'm going to change this to conditionals.js. So this is what that line should look like. Great. So now if I close the app.js and go into conditionals.js, let's just make sure that it's working. And we'll go console.log conditionals file. Save that. And yeah, we've got our conditionals file turning up here, which means that we know that we've linked up our JavaScript file correctly. Okay, so I said in the introduction to this video that it was about making decisions based on whether something is true or whether something is false. So in JavaScript, we can save these values into variables just like if we were it was a string or a number. But the way that we write true and false in JavaScript is literally just by using the word true or false, all lowercase. So, for example, we could say const my value equals and then true. And that will just say that my value is the Boolean value of true. We could also make this false by writing the word false. If anyone's done any Python before, you'll know that you write true and false with a capital, but in JavaScript, it's all lowercase. Cool, so let's just have a look at how we write our first conditional. And probably the easiest way of doing this is with what's called an if statement. And it kind of sounds a bit like natural language. It's like, if something is true, go and do this. So the way that we do that is we can say if my, and then what we do is we put our conditional in brackets, in parentheses. So we could say my value. Now, anyone that's done any programming before will know that I'm writing kind of messy, bad code here, but it's in order to prove the point. So we can say if my value is equal to true, then we want to go ahead and do whatever is in our curly brackets here. We have to add these curly brackets because in JavaScript, curly brackets are what give us code blocks. So we're going to say if my value is true, we want it to console.log the value is true. So if we save this and go over to our console, we get the value is true because this my value here, it evaluates as true. Fantastic. We'll come back to this in a moment and I'll show you an easier way of doing this. But for now, we're just looking if my value is true. Let's go ahead and write false in here in the my value. So if we save this, you'll see that nothing happens because it said, well, if my value is true, do this, but it wasn't. And we've not given it any other options. So what we can do in here is we can say, if it's true, we want to do this. But if it's anything else, we want it to do something else. So we can say else, and then we need to add curly brackets here. And we say, in this instance, console.log the value. Oh, I need to put this in quotation marks. The value is false. So if we save that, great, we get the value is false because it said, if it's true, do this. Otherwise, do this. Absolutely fantastic. So let's have a look how we can compare values and compare things in JavaScript. So let's look at the different things that we can do in here. We're just going to write these a kind of a simple way, and then we'll come back to use them inside some if statements later. So, for example, if we want to check equality, so we've already seen this up here, but we can check the equality of two values. So under this equality comment that I've just put here, we'll say console.log. And then in here, we can put a conditional statement. So we'll say is 1 equal to 1? Let's save that. And you can see here on line 12, we get true because 1 is equal to 1. If, for example, we were to change this to the number 2 and save it, you would see that this would evaluate to false. Something to bear in mind here is that if we do this, so console.log, a string of 1, and then the triple equal sign for equality is equal to 1 here, and we save that, you'll notice that we get false because this is checking the type. It's saying a string of 1 is not equal to 1. Now, there is a way that we can get around that, and it's just something that I want you to steer clear of, but I want you to be aware of it. So if you submit some homework where you're not doing type safe equality, you're not using the 3 equals, and you're instead using 2 equals, I will pull you up on it. So if we save this now, you'll see that this evaluates as true. And what this is doing is it's saying that the string of 1 is basically the same as the number 1. It is the same, it has the same value, and this is not checking type. And it's one of the things that makes JavaScript a little bit of a weird language. So it's just something that I want you to bear in mind is that this can get you into some trouble. So please steer clear of using double equals and instead try and always use the triple equals. Cool, so let's have a look at greater than and less than. So let's make a note, greater than and less than. So let's go console.log. And the way that we can do this is we can say if, say, the number 3 is greater than the number 2, and we use that angle bracket, a little bit like we used in HTML, but it has a very different operation here. And save this. We'll see that on line 16, yep, 3 is indeed greater than 2. If we change this number to 5 and save, we'll see that it's in fact false because 3 is not greater than 5. We can do this the other way round. We could say console.log is 3 less than 5. You see, we use kind of the other angle bracket. Let's have a look at that. Yep, absolutely. 3 is less than 5. Let's change this to a 2, just to check that it works the other way around. Yep, that's false because 3 is not less than 2. Cool. Let's now have a look at when things are greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So let's just put a little note here, greater / less or equal to. So the way that we can do this is we can say console.log, and then we'll say if 3, for example, is greater than or equal to, and make sure you don't put a space in between these. If 3 is greater than or equal to 3, let's see. Okay, so that's true because, yeah, 3 is equal to 3. Let's have a look if we change this to 5. Yep, 3 is not greater than, and it is not equal to 5. So let's change this to 2 and save. Brilliant, because 3 is greater than or equal to 2. It is greater than 2, so that turns up as true. Fantastic. I bet you can guess what the other way to do this, so less than or equal to is, but let's write it out anyway. Console.log, 3 is less than or equal to 2. And of course we get false because 3 is not less than or equal to 2. But again, if I change this to 3 and save that there, yep, line 21, that evaluates to true because 3 is equal to 3. So let's have a look at not equal to. So kind of the opposite of equality. Well, the way that we do this is we can write this out with console.log, and then we can say if, just pick any number, so we'll say 3 again, is not equal to, and we use that exclamation mark or that bang to say it is not equal to 5, let's say. And let's save this. Absolutely, on line 24 we get true because 3 is not equal to 5. But if we change this to a 3 and save, you'll see that it comes up as false because 3 is equal to 3, but this says, no, it's only evaluate to true if it is not equal to 3. So these are just some of the ways that we can make decisions in JavaScript. So let's make an if statement here. We can say if 3 is greater than 2, we want it to do something. So don't forget we add the curly brackets. And we'll say, in this instance, console.log, yep, 3 is greater than 2. Fantastic, we get the output of, yep, 3 is greater than 2 here. So you see, we can add all of these conditional statements into this. And if this evaluates to true, then this will run. Let's look at some slightly more complicated conditionals. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say const num. And in here, we'll just save a number. And I'm just going to put the number 1 inside this variable. So we can say if, and then parentheses. So if num is equal to 1, add some curly brackets, we will log out console.log the number is 1. Okay, so let's just test that. And yes, we get the number is 1. But what if we want this to change to something? Say, for example, 2. Well, nothing is printed from here. So instead what we could do is we could say else if num is equal to 2, then add our curly brackets. We'll say console.log the number is 2. So let's save that. And now we get the number is 2. Well, that's quite handy. So what it's done is it's gone into this if statement here, and this has said, oh, no, it's not equal to 1, so this is false. So it ignores everything between these curly brackets. It then drops into this else, and we're saying here, if the num is equal to 2, go ahead and do this. Now we can stack an unlimited amount of these else if statements. So we could say else if num is equal to 3, curly brackets, and then console.log the number is 3. We save that, and we're still getting the number is 2 because this has evaluated to true. So it's done this. This is evaluated to true, and it's executed this code block here. So we have console logged the number is 2. Now, because this evaluated to true, it's completely ignored and it's not continued into the other else blocks. If we change this to 3 and save it, we now get the number is 3 because it's gone, oh, no, this is false. And then it said, let's try this one. And then it said, no, this is false. So it's then dropped into this one and said, aha, yes, this one's true. So we'll run this code block here. What if none of these are true? Well, here we did experiment with this before. We could say else, and then we do not add another if. And if none of these evaluate to true, it will instead drop into the else block. So we'll say console.log the number is not 1, 2, or 3. So we'll save that. Of course, this one is evaluating as true. So we're getting the number is 3. But let's make this 35. Save that. Yeah, absolutely. The number is not 1, 2, or 3. So it's really important to realize that if one of these does evaluate to true, it will only run the code in that code block. If it evaluates as false, it will drop to the next one and only run that code block if it evaluates as true. We can add kind of a catch-all at the end with just an else block. And this will say if nothing evaluates to true, we're going to run this instead. Of course, if we left off that else block, and I'm just going to quickly remove that and save, of course we get nothing printed because we've not controlled for if all of these are false. I'm just going to do Command Z just to bring that back. And we now get, yep, the number is not 1, 2, or 3 because we've dropped into this else block here. I want to just show you another way of doing conditionals. So what we can use is something called the ternary operator, and this is quite often used, and we'll be using this a lot actually in React. And it's basically a question mark symbol. So what we can say is, we could say const my variable, and we'll set this equal to something. So let's just say that if num, our variable here, is greater than, so let's say 10, what do we want to do? So we're going to add a question mark here, and this is the ternary operator. And we'll say, right after the question mark, we want to say what my variable should be if num is in fact greater than 10. So if this evaluates to true, what do we want my variable to be? So let's just make it a string of greater. Now, after this, you'll see that we've got an error here, and that's because we've not completed our ternary statement. So I'll add a space, and I will add a colon here. And then after the colon, we need to say what we want my variable to be if this evaluates to false. So what we'll do here is we'll say that it should be a string of less than. Okay, so under here, let's just go ahead and console.log my variable. So let's save that. We'll see that on line 44, we're logging out this my variable, and that is greater. Well, that's because, yeah, 35 is in fact greater than 10. So my variable is greater. If we change num to 5 and save, you'll see that my variable now becomes the string of less than. So this is a really simple way of just saving kind of values in a variable depending on a conditional of sorts. And of course, we can use all of the same operators here that we can use in if statements as well. Just something to bear in mind if you have a really simple conditional that you need to save in a variable. We could, of course, save the values true and false in here. Of course, num is not equal to 10, so it is false. But if we were to say is not equal to 10, of course we evaluate as true because it is here. It is true. My variable is now the value of true.